Good morning and welcome back to the Weekly Pulse podcast. I am Jeff Snyder. I'm the founder of the Morning Pulse and your host for the next 60 plus minutes as we go around the globe to discuss the issues related to retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. So glad you were able to join us this morning. Our special guest this week, Mari Backman. She is the personal finance reporter for The Motley Fool. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Weekly Pulse. Well, let's kick things off as we always do with a look at the latest social media trends. And joining me on the line, LinkedIn Senior Financial Services Editor, Devin Banerjee, joining us from San Francisco. Hey, Devin, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jeff?
I am doing quite well. The week is off to was a great week, and heading into the weekend, and just been great. So glad we could connect, and always interested to hear the latest trends from the LinkedIn perspective with your over 600 million subscribers. So what's top of mind for you and the folks in LinkedIn today?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. As always, some really interesting workplace-related trends being featured on the platform and a lot of conversation around it. The first one is this report that came out from Morgan Stanley recently. Morgan Stanley looked at data over the past 8 years and looked at companies globally, about 2,000 of them, and found that companies with the highest proportion of women employees actually had annual returns on their equity, their stock returns, about 3 percentage points higher than the least diverse firms. So this really kicked off a passionate conversation on the platform. You know, we've seen a lot of studies and research come out that looks at kind of the more qualitative aspects of diversity, including gender diversity on teams and at companies. So it's always great to see some more quantitative research come out on that. And again, this study looked at companies globally. It was over the course of 8 years. Obviously, a lot of people pointing out, correlation doesn't mean causation. But I think, in this case, people are hoping this is causation and at least seeing some signs pointing toward causation, not least of which are the results of other quantitative research we've seen that looks, for example, at more specific groups within companies like boards of directors and C-suite teams. So this kind of follows, those same trend lines and shows that an entire employee workforce that's more diverse actually can boost stock market returns and company performance.
Well, I think that's probably what if anything, money talks, right? So I'm sure shareholders certainly be responsive to that. And, to me, I like diversity of opinion, diversity of thought. I think that's important, and I think the more different points of view you have, the better off you can represent yourself to your customers, and ultimately that's who we're trying to serve if we're a for-profit company, right?
Absolutely, and your point that money talks is so important because
it does.
Obviously, because shareholders care about it, and who cares about shareholders? Well, company leadership and owners. And owners then kind of direct and put pressure on management teams, and the management teams put pressure all the way down the line. So obviously, we would hope that everyone sees the absolute objective benefits in diversity, but if not, as you said, money talks, and that sort of line, that procession line of who influences who, hopefully starts showing some changes. Speaking of changes in the workforce, as you probably know, we glean a lot of data on worker migration and all that kind of stuff from, as you said, about 650 million members globally, but in the U.S., more than 150 million. And one of the most interesting things we've been tracking for quite a while is people ditching, big cities, but we're starting to even see remote workers kind of ditch big cities even faster. And so even though big cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles are still having net inflows, the rate of inflow we're seeing is slowing, and smaller, really attractive cities like Boise, Idaho, Austin, Texas, Portland and Denver are ones we've identified as seeing a really, really high influx and actually an increasing rate of worker influx. And so, for the most part, these cities are welcoming that boom that remote working and at-home working has created. And what's really interesting in the conversation that we featured, we saw a lot of people starting to weigh in from these cities and saying, there's a flip side to this coin, or at least knock-on effects to this trend, which you can imagine include, rising home prices,
Yep.
which is always such an interesting, topic that sparks such a passionate debate, because people who own homes and own a lot of equity in their homes kind of love that trend or enjoy that trend, and those who haven't got in yet are completely on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to their point of view there. But obviously rising home prices, rising traffic, stresses on infrastructure and transportation. So such an interesting trend we're seeing in the U.S. here during this now record long economic expansion, where cities that kind of never thought they'd be on the map for these high earning, in many cases, tech remote workers are now really having to adapt.
Yeah, I'm sure companies are getting some types of tax incentives to open offices,
Yeah.
right? Tax abatements and things like that to do that, attract workers, lower cost of living. If you're working in New York, getting a New York salary, but you go to another one of these smaller cities, you keep your salary, that goes a longer way. People can save more, hint, hint, right? Really an interesting trend, Devin.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my good friends, and of course, these anecdotes are everywhere, but he's a financial journalist in New York, or he was in New York, I should say. He kept his New York salary, moved with his family to North Carolina, commutes every once in a while, back to the city, back to New York every maybe 2 weeks or so, but is, able to raise, he and his wife, 2 kids in a house, and he wasn't able to do that in New York. And so, obviously these anecdotes are everywhere, but you're absolutely right. And a final trend that we saw just really, really take off, and credit to Axios, which I think picked up on this first, but for the first time actually in U.S. history, minorities, people of color, are making up the majority of new hires in U.S. businesses. So this came from Labor Department data. As I said, Axios picked up on it pretty quickly. And yeah, I mean, that's basically it. But the knock-on effects are, really interesting. I think the shift could see more financial security, for example, for minority families who, on average, earn less and are less wealthy than their white counterparts. So, according to the Fed, white families had median wealth of $170,000 in the U.S. And let's see, mean wealth of $930,000. And Black and Hispanic families have considerably less. Hispanic families considerably less, and actually all other non-white groups on average have far less median and mean family wealth. So this could be something that kind of maybe closes that gap over time right now.
Yeah, well, I think parity and obviously equality of opportunity and parity obviously has a positive impact societally, because you eliminate can't talk right now, eliminate those differences that can create fractures in our society politically and sociologically. So good. That's really good news. Good news all around, Devin. I love when you bring us good news. Sometimes
you never know.
Sometimes you bring us, it's mixed sometimes. And I know it's not intended that way. Because you can't control, number one, what the news is going to be. 2, you can't control what people are going to say. But I love these were uplifting stories. I'm uplifted going into the show.
Yeah, I think you and I are both optimists, and so I think we enjoy stories like this.
Awesome. Well, Devin, it's great chatting with you. Thanks so much for kicking off the show in the right way, as you always do. And we'll talk to you again next week, my friend. And don't forget, Devin Banerjee is going to be on Broadcast Retirement Network's BRN AM Monday morning, so don't forget to check him out. We're going to wake him up real early, get him out of bed to talk about something. So, Devin, take care, my friend. Have a great weekend. We'll talk with you soon.
Thanks. Sounds good, Jeff. Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Well, Great conversation as always with Devin Banerjee. He kicked us off on a great positive outlook. And now we're going to shift gears, talk a little technology. And actually joining me from West Palm Beach, Florida today, he's not traveling. He's not in Washington, D.C. He's not somewhere, in Tampa, Florida. Mr. Daniel Klein. He is the Motley Fool Senior Technology Reporter and Consumer Products Reporter. Daniel, good to talk with you, Dan.
Hey, Jeff, I am actually on my way to Vegas in the morning, but yes, I'm at my desk as we speak.
Well, that's great. So you're obviously covering a lot of different angles. I know you were at FinCon last week. We had you on the television program to talk about that. That was great coverage, really interesting. But what's top of mind for you this week? We had the Apple iPhone stuff going on, but what's top of mind?
Yeah, so the only thing I'm thinking about is the Apple iPhone. And every year I tell myself, I'm not going to buy the new iPhone, because it looks just like the old iPhone. It's not that different. They always promise battery life that never quite seems to pan out. And I would say pre-orders went up on T-Mobile at 8 a.m. this morning, and I held out till 8:03.
Nice.
So I pre-ordered the Apple iPhone 11 Pro Max. I think I'm saying that name correctly. It's the big one with all the bells and whistles. And I did it partially because I feel in my line of work it's kind of important to keep tabs on it. There's nothing all that exciting or different about the phone. It has 3 cameras, and we're about the same age. I'm not taking a lot of selfies. I'm not sure my cats, which I take a lot of pictures of, need 3 cameras. And, they were pretty good with, say, the iPhone 8. So it's absolutely overkill, and it's absolutely silly, but I fall for it every time.
Well, I'm actually looking at my cat, Sebastian, who is staring at me. I don't know if he wants his picture taken, but I know you are a techie, right? And we have talked about this on this program about, you love the technology, you like the Roku boxes, the Apple TVs, those kind of things. And I think it's fine if that's your hobby. I saw I fast forwarded through the announcement. For me, I had the iPhone 10. My wife and I both had the iPhone 10. We bought it 2 years ago. I just can't justify, I'm not taking pictures, but I just can't justify the A13 Bio, the new chip and all that kind of thing. It's not going to do anything more for me than it.
Yeah, and I think for most people, that's absolutely true. If you're using your phone, if you're a newspaper journalist or who's using your phone to take pictures, I think it always makes sense to have the best model possible. If you're a really heavy power user, maybe upgrade. If you have an 8 or older, certainly you got your value, consider upgrading. But I don't think the average person needs the Pro model. I think the regular iPhone 11, which is comparatively reasonably priced at, I want to say $699. I'm not entirely sure that's correct, but somewhere in that range. That's fine for most people. This, for me, is sort of my weakness. I travel, I buy technology. In the past few weeks, I upgraded my MacBook, so now I have a MacBook Pro. I've tried my 4th different fitness watch, and I think I'm going to stick with this one. It's a Fitbit Ionic. I did not care for the Apple Watch particularly. So I think most people really should be upgrading every 3 years and can sit this one out if their phone is within that range.
Let me ask you a question. So I agree with you on that, and I actually bought the iPad Pro, the second iteration of it, and it's great, it's fast, but I see no need to upgrade the iPad Pro from what I have to whatever they're offering today. Let me ask you a question. I saw the announcement, and like I said, I fast forwarded through it because I don't have an hour and a half to watch, even though Tim Cook is very compelling, not as compelling as Steve Jobs. But let me ask you, Apple TV. I want to talk about the streaming service a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
So I'm super negative on it. My colleagues don't necessarily agree. The new Apple streaming service will cost $4.99 a month, so well below Netflix. Priced, sort of the equivalent of the Disney bundle. Where for $11.99 you get ESPN Plus, Disney Plus, and Hulu. My concern about it is that everything Apple has announced seems kind of meh. Disney Plus has multiple Star Wars shows and multiple Marvel shows, not to mention an incredible archive of content. Apple seems to have like vanity projects from Oprah. Like it doesn't. Nothing they've announced seems all that exciting. The morning show, I don't want to say parody, but drama with Jennifer Aniston seems like something I might watch, but it doesn't seem like something I'm going to go out of my way to watch. It feels very much like Amazon Prime, and in one way they are pricing it like that, because if you buy a new Apple device, you get a free year of the service. So for someone like me, that essentially means this service will be free, because it's very rarely is there a year that I don't buy a new Apple product, and I'm sure there's a price limit for that. You probably can't just buy headphones, but if you buy a phone, if you buy a Mac, you'll get it. And just like Amazon Prime, maybe I'll watch it. I've tried a couple of shows.
Yeah.
There's too much TV,
Yeah.
and I know when Disney Plus comes out, I'm very excited about it, and there's a few things right at launch I'm going to watch. On the other hand, I have DC Universe, and I love comic book stuff, and there's probably like 4 shows there I haven't even started that I'd enjoy watching. So it's very hard to get on my radar when Netflix not only has so much, but it's right on my phone, and I can download things when I travel.
Well, I was going to ask you, you in the before our conversation about the Apple streaming service, you talked about, you could kind of sit this one out with Apple iPhone, and we've talked about this off and on over the course of the show. If this is a miss, and let's say the profitability is not there, is Apple's future not necessarily hardware? Is it this streaming service? Can they be successful and continue their billion-dollar value, multi-billion-dollar valuation that they have?
I'm more excited about their gaming subscription service. I think that's an area that lends itself really well to a low cost subscription, and no one sort of owns the space yet, although they have some very big competitors. And no, I think Apple's a hardware company, and they should be giving away this content as an added lure for their hardware, which they are in a sense. But if they made it so you could only watch these shows on Apple devices, and you had to have an updated within 2 or 3 years device to use it, I think that becomes a perk like Amazon Prime that's just nice. It's another reason to stay in the infrastructure. I am largely an Apple person, though looking around my desk, I see an Xbox, a PS4, a Microsoft Surface, and an HP laptop. So, I have a few things that are not Apple.
Yeah.
But they're a hardware company that has largely been underwhelming with hardware, and that's what you have to worry about more so than the potential failure of their streaming service.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, I would say diversification is a very important portfolio concept, and you're certainly doing that with technology. So what else is top of mind? I think you wanted to talk a little Target. Is that correct?
Well, let's just talk seasonal hiring.
Okay.
So Target and UPS have gotten ahead of the game, and they, between the two of them, and I don't remember the breakdown, are hiring 230,000 seasonal workers. Now, the reality is they're not going to actually be able to hire anywhere near that many. But the reason they're announcing it now is because there's an absolute competition for workers. There are not enough people. Now, when you talk seasonal jobs, you add a new pool of workers. The people who are either working to pay for the season, maybe a stay-at-home mom who's not working but picks up some hours. And then it's the people who have a job but take advantage of the fact that companies are generally pretty flexible with these holiday jobs. So they're trying to jump out ahead of their rivals and get people. And I think they're going to have a hell of a time finding people who want temporary jobs in a market where there's more full-time jobs than there are available workers.
So,
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, how do you incentivize someone? Because I was reading something about Walmart, which is one of the largest, if not the largest employer in the country, looking to hire millennials. But how do you incentivize someone to come work for Target during seasonally? Do you incentivize them with benefits? Do you give them
Employee
discounts?
discount.
Discounts?
Yeah,
Okay.
certainly a lot of people who are taking on Target as a second job are looking at employee discounts and other employee sales events. Other people are just looking at it as, wow, I can make some extra money to pay for holiday purchases. And certainly there's a pool of college kids and workers who sort of come in and out of the workforce that these jobs make sense for.
Yeah.
If you look at what Walmart did last year, they didn't go through the, I don't want to say sham, but this idea of announcing a really big number that you're never possibly going to meet. What Walmart did is they offered the hours to existing employees. And I think behind the scenes, Target's probably doing that. You'll probably see UPS and FedEx do that. And overtime is more expensive. On the other hand, onboarding people is also very expensive. So it might make more sense to give an experienced worker 5 to 10 hours of time and a half overtime, as opposed to giving somebody else twice as many hours when they don't know where things go, they don't know the system. A Target's a very big store. It's quite a challenge to learn how to work at a place like that. And I understand that they break down the tasks and they know what they're doing, but 230,000 people between those two companies is a lot of people, and the workforce simply doesn't have that many.
Yeah, let me. Yeah, I mean it's going to be interesting. Tight labor market. You got to find incentives to hire people. Let me ask you a question. So last week you were at FinCon. This week are you headed somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm on my way to Grocery Shop, which is a show that a trade show that covers the grocery industry. And for me, what's most interesting right now about that whole industry is supply chain logistics. Every retailer is being forced into this omni-channel model of you have to order online, pick up in store. What if the customer wants curbside pickup? What if he wants to come into the store and shop for stuff but have heavy items like, say, water or pet food delivered? So I want to see sort of how democratized that technology has become, meaning Amazon created certain things like payless technology, where you don't even have to go to a checkout at their Go convenience stores. Well, that technology is now available to anybody who wants to buy it, not Amazon's version, but a third-party version. I want to see if that technology works, because we're in a marketplace where the price to entry has gotten very expensive. But if you can buy those things third-party and don't have to create them, it makes it easier. We saw that happen with mobile order and pay. That was a Starbucks exclusive for a long time. Then it became something big companies could do on their own. Now it's something you can very easily get through your bank or through any service provider like a Shopify. So I'm really curious to see where we're going in that direction.
Yeah, well, actually, I am as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the television show to talk about that on our Technology Tuesday, or Tuesday Technology, or Technology Tuesday. We have to figure out what we're going to call it. But certainly an interesting topic, because more and more Americans are shopping online for food, myself sometimes included. Daniel, safe travels to you. Looking forward to chatting with you on Tuesday. So relax, kick back, enjoy the new iPhone when it comes, and we will talk with you soon, my friend.
I'll see you Tuesday.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Welcome back, and we're going to shift gears now, talk a little markets. And joining me on the line, Kevin Kelly. He is the co-founder of Delphi Digital, a cryptocurrency research organization. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Doing great, Jeff. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, and really appreciate coming on the network this week. And Bitcoin, obviously a big part of your day and something that's really growing, but also blockchain. It was really helpful for you to explain that to the viewers. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, of course.
So let's talk. This is our markets segment. So why don't you put your equity strategist hat on and take us through the market? Because when we last chatted a week prior, we were all over the place with trade issues, tariffs, volatility. People were going crazy. What's your take on what happened this week?
Yeah, I mean, so we've seen a bit of a strong reversal in some of the, I guess you'd say, sentiment around the market, right? And it's a really interesting dynamic, and this is something that I won't put out words in Oliver's mouth, but him and I have I've joked around, we've had long late night texting conversations to the point where my girlfriend's gotten almost jealous because we keep going back and forth on what the macro outlook is, because we're almost kind of getting to a point where good news could potentially become bad news. And what we mean by that is pretty much the consensus right now, if you talk to just about anybody who's in, kind of a more macro mentality, is that you're going to have central banks that continue to cut key interest rates. You're going to have potentially, I mean, you're seeing it with the ECB announcement, yesterday, ECB coming out and saying they're going to revamp their bond purchase program, right? So basically quantitative easing. And you're going to continue to see more kind of stimulus packages like that, probably from the Fed at some point. Depends on if you'll see it before year end. I think that might be a little soon, but certainly they're moving that direction, right? So in general, just more kind of dovish, accommodative, looser monetary policy. And a lot of that's getting priced into markets, right? So bonds have obviously ripped and rallied pretty strongly this year. Yields have continued to collapse. Stocks, despite the volatility recently, are still, up on the year. And so what's interesting is you kind of get a reversal on that. Let's say, everyone's so positioned for this, more dovish monetary policy theme or narrative. If you do start to see the data actually turn around and maybe like the slowing global growth narrative isn't as bad as people think, you may actually see, yields rebound and tick up. You've seen that with treasuries this week where, the 2-year yield jumped. I mean, at its highest week over week change in its yield since 2009, right? So you're really seeing kind of bonds sell off on the back of better than expected trade news, right? You potentially get a trade deal coming through. So the bottom line is if you start to see kind of bonds, sell off, yields tick higher, that could cause a repricing in the equity markets. And you could start to see how a lot of this could start to spiral and really kind of cause some chaos within markets, even though the underlying data is coming in better than expected. That's kind of the trigger point.
So here we were a couple of weeks ago. The sky was falling, and we get this like it's every couple of weeks, every couple of months, the sky's falling. Now things have turned around. Now we're back to a softening stance from the central banks. Am I just better off staying where I am in terms of my positions? Because it's almost like indexing, right? If you index, you don't have the market volatility because theoretically, over a long period of time, you just get the steady growth. But I'm like, instead of ping ponging back and forth like a Wimbledon match, am I just better off just instead of selling and reacting, just staying where I am?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, market volatility isn't all bad by nature, right? A lot of people kind of gauge, market risk based on volatility, but you have both sides of the coin, right? You have downside volatility, but you also have upside volatility. That's why stocks, typically tend to, over longer periods of time, outperform other asset classes because, again, it is a riskier bet. But over a longer term time horizon, that volatility, right, kind of gets smoothed out, and the upside gains are basically from, the more upside volatile days, so to speak. So I definitely think, it's not something, and right now, if you're a macro strategist and you're, engulfed in this stuff on a daily basis, it is a very interesting time because, you could see markets kind of go either way. There's one camp that says, there's really no end in sight in terms of lower yields. Yields will probably push lower. There's people even talking about potentially, negative yielding treasuries here in the U.S. at some point, maybe over the next 12 to 18 months, if the Fed continues to cut interest rates and again gets more and more dovish. There's a flip side that says that can't happen, and again you'll get this kind of repricing in bonds. So I certainly think it's one of those definitely stay the course. Not a time to change up the allocations by any means, but certainly again as we talked about for the last few weeks. I do think it is a good time to, potentially evaluate the potential of adding something, small positions to something like gold, right, which has done really well recently and almost serves as kind of like a portfolio hedge. It's a very similar argument we make when we talk to institutions or kind of sophisticated investors looking to make an allocation to something like Bitcoin. I mean, a lot of the short-term arguments for Bitcoin and gold are very, very similar.
Yeah. So let's switch hats. Take your hat off. It's a baseball cap. Now I want you to put on your crypto hat, which is more like a fedora, like Indiana Jones. And I want to read two headlines for you and get your reactions. The first is researchers invent cryptocurrency wallet that eliminates entire classes of vulnerabilities. What's that mean to you?
Yeah. So basically, that news is there's interesting kind of nuances when it comes to custodying and actually storing crypto, right? And we've talked a little bit about it on the show. You just call something like cold storage or hard wallets, right? Where you basically take your crypto, your Bitcoin, offline essentially, and it's a device that never actually touches the internet. So you're not vulnerable to all the exchange hacks that you're constantly reading about and things of that nature. One of the tough parts about that up until pretty recently, and this is what some of the solutions coming out are trying to solve. One of the limitations of that was that if you wanted to go and trade from a hard wallet or cold storage, you typically had to, plug the device back in, kind of almost like re-upload your crypto to, an exchange and then go and trade it. Or now they're coming out with some pretty innovative solutions to kind of get around that. So you're not necessarily as exposed to putting your money into an exchange or what they call a hot wallet, which is, again, very vulnerable to potential attacks on the exchange itself. That's some of the kind of innovation that's starting to come out. That certainly is something that I think will help accelerate the institutional adoption of this space because custody and actually the immutable nature of Bitcoin's blockchain is one of the key risks too, right? Because if you fat finger a number or end up sending it to the wrong address, I mean that transaction is pretty much gone forever, right? Unless you can actually get the other person that you sent it to send it back to you. So there's a lot of kind of nuances that these projects are trying to solve.
Yeah, and that's what my thinking was. Is this had more, not legitimacy, but it doesn't support what the thesis that we're talking about, which is this crypto digital, this digital currency. One more topic, headline. This is interesting because we've talked about Venezuela and other countries skirting U.S. sanctions. Cubans flock to cryptocurrency to shop online and send funds. What do you think of that?
So
What do you think of that?
that's also an interesting one. Again, I mean, the market, I think a lot of those headlines too can often get blown up a little bit or exaggerated. I mean, it's not to say that trend isn't happening, but even other countries like Argentina, the demand for Bitcoin in Argentina, just given all the capital controls going on there, it's higher than average, but it's not necessarily moving the needle, right? Because the adoption there certainly isn't as large as it is in Asia, for example. I mean, that's a way. Again, the kind of downside or one of the big, I guess they could critiques of Bitcoin and crypto is that you can use it to, get around sanctions and things of that nature. Bitcoin's blockchain, is what you call kind of, pseudo-anonymous in that you can't necessarily see. You can see all the transactions that occur and that take place between different addresses, but you can't necessarily tie that address or that long string of numbers to an individual person, right? It's tough to do that. But if you are able to do that, then you can see their entire transaction history, right? So it's anonymous in that sense, but in the same time, it's not. And it's not necessarily kind of like a privacy solution. So I think the illicit activity narrative for, Bitcoin and crypto is definitely overblown, but it's not to say that it doesn't occur.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you. Excellent analysis on the markets, and then the fact that you're able to shift gears and talk crypto and blockchain, very impressive. We will certainly talk with you soon. Have a great weekend and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, sure. You too.
Thanks, bud. Bye. Welcome back, and now we're going to talk a little real estate. This is a new segment, and that we started last week, and really love the fabulous combination from MarketWatch, Jacob Passy and Alan Milito, but we decided that more is more, so we split them off into separate segments. And joining me now from MarketWatch, Mr. Jacob Passy. He's the real estate reporter there. Hey, JP, how are you, bud?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing okay. I spent the early part of the week in New Orleans, so hot and sticky, but back in the relatively cooler weather of the New York area. So happy to be here and happy to chat with you. So I know you've been busy and on your beat. So what's top of mind this week on the real estate beat?
Yeah, so there was a study that came out this week from Zillow, the real estate giant. So they do this periodic survey where they survey around 100 real estate experts, economists, investment strategists, et cetera, to kind of gauge their expectation of the U.S. real estate market, home prices, et cetera. And so the most recent survey came out this week, and it found that 54% of these experts said that they don't expect that new home construction is going to reach its kind of long-term average rate until 2022 or later. So basically, since the recession, as a lot of listeners probably know, home building activity has not really recovered all that much. In the lead up to the recession, part of what drove up, the real estate market was there's lots of speculation because it was so easy for people to get loans. Home builders were building everywhere, building tons of homes, these gigantic, sub-developments, et cetera. And a lot of those, units sat vacant when the recession hit. And so, in the recovery, the home building industry they've rebounded somewhat from the recession, but a lot of the building activity that we've seen has been basically focused on two things. There's been a lot of new apartment buildings being constructed. Obviously, lots of people have been renting in recent years because they can't afford to buy a home, or we're dealing with bad credit because of the financial crisis, what have you. And so demand for multifamily housing, apartment buildings skyrocketed, and so they've been building a lot of apartment buildings duplexes, 3 to 5 family homes, things like that. And then they were building lots of luxury homes, mansions basically, or in some markets it doesn't take that big of a home to get expensive, but they were building on the upper end of the market because it was less risky. The rich people recovered relatively quickly from the recession compared with folks at the lower end of the income spectrum, and so there was demand at the upper end of the market to buy homes. Not bigger, better homes. And so they focused on that end at the expense of the affordable end of the market, where today we're seeing the most demand. And that's what's, that's kind of the whole recipe for what we've been seeing in terms of home prices being so high in some parts of the country and continuing to go up. And so it's notable that these experts basically said, that the pace of home building isn't going to reach its long-term average until 2022 or later. So basically, the way that the government and folks measure this is an annual rate, so seasonally adjusted annual rate. So since 1959, the seasonally adjusted average annual rate of home building was 1 million homes a year. And, just before the recession, it hit an all-time high of 1.8 million homes in 2006. And so we're not expected to get to that 1 million kind of threshold until, many years from now. In fact, 16% of the people they surveyed actually don't think that this milestone will occur until 2025 at the earliest. And that's 6 years from now. So that's a big deal. So what does that mean? The biggest thing that it means is that, to the extent that the lack of homes for sale contributes to high home prices, that could continue because basically we haven't been for the past decade almost we haven't been building homes at the rate that we need to take into account growing population and growing demand for homes. So there's a gap there, and that gap is going to continue to lead to there being higher demand than the supply can take care of, and as a result, prices will go up. Kind of basic economics there. Yeah. So kind of an interesting story. Kind of runs. There's concerns about a recession in the economy and things like that. And that could have an effect on the housing market. But the key thing to remember right now is that a lot of the issue, unlike the last recession, which was caused by the housing market, any current economic downturn or expected economic downturn these days is not expected to be caused by the housing market. And in past recessions, before the Great Recession, the housing market wasn't nearly as badly hit, and in some cases, actually, you continue to see home prices increase throughout the recession, and so that's kind of what we're expecting this time around. So, a good thing to keep an eye out on if you're looking to buy in the near future. If home building activity is picking up in your area, that's a good sign that home prices may stay fairly level, because especially if they're building affordable units or kind of starter home type units. Yeah.
So Jacob, I know we've talked in other segments on the show about more people renting, and is this symptomatic of that? Or are people just, young people, mature people, all different of all different ages rent? It's just the ease of renting versus owning. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think there is a combination of factors here. I do think, I think that the recession did play a huge role in the larger rental population we see these days. It became a lot harder to get a loan, whether that was because, lenders are, much more stingy these days. A lot of lenders still don't feel comfortable lending to certain subsets of the population that they might have lent to, pre-2006. So, compared to, those heydays, lenders are much more reticent to give folks loans. That's probably also a good thing, though, because, a lot of people who were getting loans in the 06, 05 era probably shouldn't have been getting those loans. That's why we saw the foreclosures, mount up. And then speaking of the foreclosures, there are, certainly a lot of people who, until recent, the past few years still had foreclosures on their, credit histories that were affecting their credit scores. So it was, very hard for those people to, qualify for loans, even if they, had fully recovered from, the economic downturn. They may have still been, blocked out of the market. You also see, among younger populations, you see lots of talk about this, and it's certainly true. Student loans are a huge issue. It makes it a lot harder for people not only to, qualify from, a debt to income standpoint, because that can be, a major barrier, but also just, it's harder to save, the money that you need to save to put towards a down payment if you're, making very large student loan payments every month. And if you're also trying to save for retirement. But I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that people's tastes are changing. You see more and more reporting around that, and more surveys that are suggesting, people want to live more in urban areas. They like, there's a kind of shift, away from the, large subdevelopment with the large yard and things like that to, perhaps a smaller home, but closer to, big amenities, public transportation, things like that, shopping, dining.
Yeah.
And there's an extent to which, multifamily housing, rental housing, living in an apartment building lends itself to that in a lot of parts of the country. And so, and also just by virtue of the fact that those were the units that were becoming available, and a lot of those units were rental units, that contributes to all that. That being said, study after study will also show that, the dream of homeownership, as it were, still very much exists for the American public. I think, most people who are renters would prefer to own their own home because, at the end of the day, it's one of the biggest wealth drivers that we have in this country. In terms of your, the rate of return you see on a home is, better than a lot of other investments you can make depending on where you live. Granted, some parts of the country that might not be true because of how expensive real estate may be or how, little home price appreciation you might see on the flip side. But I think, because it's such a big driver of wealth in this country, that until that's no longer is the case, if that were to ever change, if that, if real estate appreciation were to slow over the longer term to such an extent that it doesn't make much sense to, tie up your money into a home, I think, there's always going to be demand there.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, always interesting hearing about these trends. I mean, there's so many, and there's a lot of socioeconomic factors that I think go into it. But appreciate it, and I hope you don't miss Allie. We'll have to reunite you with Allie from time to time, so you don't miss her. Even though I think
we're working on. Actually, speaking of reuniting, she and I are working on kind of a story looking at retirement and homeownership. We're working together on the question of how you weigh retirement saving, kind of just this issue I just was bringing up, how you weigh, saving for retirement through other methods versus, putting your money into your home. And we haven't set a date yet for when that story is going to come out, but it should come out in the next few weeks, and we could team up again to chat about that.
Absolutely. You're such a teasing that out there. And also, I think, don't you sit back to back with each other in the newsroom?
We do.
Okay,
She was just looking over at me,
giving you a dirty look,
being like, "Hey, when are we going to work on that?"
Yeah, nice.
So yeah. We'll keep you posted.
Awesome. Well, Jacob Passy, always a pleasure, my friend. Enjoy the weekend, and we will talk with you again next week, my friend. Bye.
All right. Take care.
Bye. Yeah. Welcome back, and now we're very pleased to be joined by Mari Backman. She is a personal finance reporter with the Motley Fool. Mari, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. The weather has started to turn a little bit, and I spent the early part of the week in New Orleans, Louisiana, visiting for a conference. It was exceptionally hot, and really like the Northeast weather now compared to that.
Yeah, same here. It's definitely a relief to have things cool down. But do you want to know what's not a relief?
Yes, please tell me what's not a relief.
Here's what's not a relief. So I read a recent survey about Americans and their knowledge about Social Security, and it appears like we're pretty clueless, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I would say if Social Security obviously been around for almost 80 years now. I think 80 years this year, right? It was passed in the 1930s. So it's hard to believe that people don't understand it. But there's so many nooks and crannies to it, and so many different iterations. I would imagine, Maury, that it is hard to understand in some ways, right?
It is hard to understand. I think I once read something like the program's official rule book has like thousands of rules, technically speaking. But I think for retirement planning purposes, there are a few important ones that people can focus on rather than committing to maybe reading, thousands upon thousands of rules. I think the main thing that people need to realize is that while Social Security, while your benefits are calculated based on your specific wages, basically there's a formula that takes your 35 highest paid years of wages and they're indexed for inflation, and your benefits are derived from that number. The age that you file for benefits at will ultimately determine what you collect. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't realize how problematic it is to file for benefits early. So you're entitled to your full benefit, the one that your work history entitles you to, once you reach what's known as full retirement age, or FRA, as I might call it in the course of this conversation. Mm-hmm. It's just easier to abbreviate. Yep. And FRA is based on your year of birth, and it's either going to be 66, 67, or somewhere in between. For anyone born in 1960 or later, it's 67. So if you're a little bit on the younger side, it's just easy to remember. So assuming your FRA is 67, that's when you're entitled to your full monthly benefit. However, the Social Security Administration will let you claim benefits as early as age 62. And that's actually, for years now, it's been the most popular age to file for benefits. And on the one hand, that makes sense because people want their money as soon as they're entitled to it. The problem is that for each year, actually for each month you file ahead of FRA, your benefits take a hit in the process. So that if you file at 62 with a full retirement age of 67, you're effectively just cutting 30% of your benefits off right there.
Yeah, that's humongous. And do you account for the fact that, or in your research and for writing the article that we're talking about, do you account for this lack of knowledge? Does it come down to financial literacy? Just not doing the research? I mean, is there any one or two items that really led to this deficiency?
Well, to be fair, when we talk about Americans on a whole being a little bit clueless about Social Security, younger folks are logged into that statement. Mm-hmm. And I could sort of see why people in their 20s and even 30s, maybe 40s, aren't really well versed in Social Security because it's something that they're not going to get to collect for many, many years. So I could sort of understand that why bother learning about it mentality. Mm-hmm. What's a little bit more problematic is when you hear that older workers, those in their 50s, for example, or early 60s, don't really understand the rules because, those are the people who really need to start seriously thinking about retirement planning. And a big part of that planning is devising a strategy as to when you'll claim Social Security. And to be clear, filing early isn't always a bad idea, but it's often a bad idea. It's particularly a bad idea if you aren't really saving much independently. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to retire with a $5 million balance in your 401k, then perhaps your Social Security check won't make a big difference in your finances. But if you're saving maybe a couple of $100 a year for retirement, or you're in your 50s or early 60s and you've got maybe $10,000 socked away, which, trust me, is the case for plenty of people, mm-hmm. then you become more reliant on those benefits, in which case do you really want to substantially slash your highest income stream for retirement?
Yeah, I think it's just some basic explanation. People kind of acclimated, and no matter what your age, you should understand just some of the basics that underpin saving in our society. One of the things that I've heard, and we've talked about it on this program, is the solvency of Social Security. Do you think that when you referred to millennials or Gen Z, what I call younger folks because they're all younger relative to me, but do you think it's just that people, because of the question about the solvency of Social Security, that they just say, that's not even going to be there for me, so let me just not even think about that?
I think that's definitely part of the mentality. And unfortunately, Social Security is facing some financial challenges. The thing, though, that I like to tell people, younger people especially, is don't give up on it. It's not totally going away. So the reason Social Security is facing a future income shortfall is because basically we have a mass exodus of baby boomers from the workforce and not enough new labor participants to replace them. So what's going to start happening is, the program is going to be paying out more in benefits than it's taking in revenue. Now, luckily, the program has a trust fund that it can tap. It's sort of like its own personal bank account that it can tap, to make up that shortfall. The Social Security trustees think that trust fund is going to be out of money by 2035. So a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, well, then I guess that's when benefits stop. No, that's not what's happening. At that point, beneficiaries may see a cut in payments. As of right now, the estimate is 20%. So if you're used to collecting, $1,000 a month from Social Security, your check might go down to $800. That's definitely a possibility. But because the program's primary funding source is payroll taxes, basically as long as we have a workforce and keep taking out taxes for Social Security purposes, the program's going to have revenue. So it's going to pay benefits. So basically, don't give up on it and learn about it, because eventually it is going to do something for you.
Yeah. It's interesting. And there have been, this has been a topic of conversation, since I entered the workforce, in terms of what Social Security is and how can we fund it. And, we've gotten everything from means testing, right, where you test whether or not someone actually needs Social Security based on a certain income. And I was actually talking on my program, my television show, with someone from Australia, and they means test for the national pension based on income. So that's certainly a solution, or a potential solution. I guess it depends on what side of the coin you're on. And then we've also talked about privatization of parts of Social Security, but none of these things really seem to get any groundswell of support in the Congress. It just becomes this issue where it's very divisive, right? And the first thing that, if anyone hears benefit cuts, and being that this is part of that stool, that savings stool that people are talking about, people just go out in force and go crazy, and it just kind of scares off the politicians. But I agree with you. I think
unfortunately there's no real solution that's going to make everybody happy. Another common solution is just raise the payroll cap, right? So, so right now, once you're making somewhere in the ballpark of like $133,000, you're paying the same amount of Social Security tax on your income as someone who's making $3 million. So a lot of people are advocating to raise that cap, but then of course you're going to have, wealthier people or higher earners, up in arms. So I don't think there's a great solution that's going to please everyone. But I do think that at some point there will be some kind of solution, because, if we don't implement one, there are millions of seniors who rely on these benefits for the bulk of their income. Actually, I could tell you, because I actually just did a separate article on this. I can tell you that, let me see here. Okay. So basically 21% of married seniors and 45% of unmarried seniors, get this, they count on Social Security for 90% or more of their income. 90% or more.
Yeah.
Okay. So, these are the same people who, if, in a decade or so from now, their benefits are slashed by 20%, they're going to dive below the poverty line. That's not good.
Yeah.
I don't think Congress is going to just sit back and say, oh, well, let's let that happen and see how it plays out.
And I should also point out that for Medicare, they did pop the cap, which is what you're describing, where they did tax wages above, because it used to be capped like Social Security, and then they popped the cap. And I think
Medicare, you pay taxes
on everything, right?
Everything.
Well, I hope, Maury, that we're reaching a few people today to do some research. I'm sure they can go out to the socialsecurity.gov website. I'm sure they can go to YouTube. They can consult their financial advisor. They can consult your articles, The Motley Fool, other periodicals to learn a little bit more. But no matter what your age, you should understand the benefits that you're owed and that you've accrued. If not, you're leaving potentially money on the table, right?
They should do that. And I'll tell you something, no matter your age, you can create a Social Security account online and access your earnings statements and get an estimate of what your benefits will actually be in retirement. Keeping in mind that, cuts are possible, and keeping in mind that the age you file at will alter what that number is. Now, of course, if you're older, that estimate's going to be more accurate because your benefits are based on your earnings history. So if you're 24 and you look at your estimated benefit, it probably doesn't hold much weight. But if you're in your 40s, 50s, you can start to get a real sense, actually, of what you're entitled to, and that can help you do some financial planning. One other quick important thing I want to just let people know in case, people are taking this stuff seriously, you'll lose out on benefits if you file before your full retirement age. But you're also allowed to delay benefits past your full retirement age. For each year you do, up until age 70, you can boost them by 8% a year. So that's definitely a good strategy for someone who's approaching retirement without much in the way of saving. Yeah. Something important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Well, she is Maury Backman, and she's awesome. So, Maury, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Great information. Hopefully, you users and listeners. I don't know where I defaulted to loser, but users and listeners.
Users and listeners combined is, it becomes losers. It's
right.
Okay.
I'm hoping
it's losers with a U.
That's right.
Losers with a U.
That's right. They can certainly listen and take some notes, and hopefully they're checking their statements today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Maury. Great chatting with you, and we'll talk with you soon.
Take care, Jeff.
Bye-bye. Welcome back, and now we're going to switch gears again. The whole show is about switching gears, I guess. We're covering a lot of topics, but really pleased to welcome one half of the Market Watch dynamic duo, Miss Alessandra Melito. She is the retirement reporter for Market Watch. Hey, Allie.
Hi.
Hey, welcome. Welcome to the program. Great to talk with you again. And I know you're celebrating Friday the 13th. Do you have any superstitions?
No, 13 is a good number for the Italians, so I'm not scared of anything.
You're the second. You're the second Italian that's told me that. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
well,
we really feel strongly about our 13.
Okay, well, you're entitled. I know that there are some baseball players with the number 13, and 13 is an important number for some culture. So very cool. So shift. As I mentioned, we're going to talk a little retirement. So what have you been thinking about this week? I know you've been thinking about coffee because I see your posts online, but what are you writing about in terms of retirement?
So I did a couple of stories this week on different suggestions for how to make the most of your retirement saving, and also a fun little piece on how to retire like Tina Turner.
Ah.
So on the more fun side, Tina Turner she had the spotlight in the New York Times article recently because there's a Broadway show coming out and is focused on her. So she mentioned a lot about, she talked a lot about her retirement. She's currently living in Switzerland, and she said that she is loving it. She's been retired for about 10 years, and the whole piece was just about, what life is like for her now. Even though people around the world are still, absolutely crazy about her and going to shows about her and creating shows about her, it was about whatever is happening in her life. So I tried to find a couple of little pieces that people could take away from that article and just how Tina Turner is during retirement and if you could do the same thing. So one example, something that I thought was super interesting. So Tina Turner actually doesn't own the mansion that she lives in. So she lives in the chateau. She calls it the Chateau Algonquin, and she rents it. Her landlord actually lives in her attic, and he has control of, the boathouse or something because they live on Lake Zurich. So that's something to consider. Do you actually have to own a home in retirement? Does it make sense to rent? That was one consideration. Something else was she has all of her possessions out on display. So there's actually nothing in storage for her anymore. She has a set of castle keys and pictures and paintings and knickknacks from her travels and, when she lived in the U.S., and she keeps everything on display. So kind of reminded me of a piece I had done a while back on decluttering in retirement, not only for your loved ones, when later down the road you are no longer with us, but even for yourself, like how to make the most of the space that you're in and, get rid of stuff that you actually don't care about anymore, especially if you're downsizing.
Yeah, so it sounds like, I was going to just say, it sounds like you're talking downsizing, and that seems like the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely, especially if you end up renting in retirement. I mean, Tina Turner does it, so who knows? She also, something that was very prevalent in the piece was that she knew that it was time to quit. She said that by the end of her 50th anniversary tour in 2009, she was, like when she was on tour, she was thinking about decorating her home instead of performing on stage. She was, she was over it. And one of the quotes that I really liked that I thought was interesting, she says, "I was just tired of singing and making everybody happy. That's all I'd ever done in my life." So that leads me into the next thing, the next way that you can retire like Tina Turner, which is to make the most of it. Like, this is your time. Let go of expectations about you, for you, from people about you, and just do what you got to do. She said that, like, during her career, a lot of the time people wanted to talk about her former abusive husband, and they always wanted her, sing and dance and stuff. And now she only sings and dances when she wants, which most of the time is in a car sitting next to her current husband of 30 years. And listening to Coldplay or something like that. So she's a fun rock star, and she actually showed a lot. I mean, the piece wasn't that long. It wasn't one of those 5,000 word profiles, but it did show us a window into the retirement of Tina Turner.
Yeah, I think it's. I was going to say it sounds like she's very humble. Humility is obviously very important. And what I like is, sometimes when she learned the lesson of, do things for yourself and don't worry about what other people think. And I think if I had learned that lesson even 5 years ago, I'd be in a better place than I am now. You know what I mean? Like, doing things for yourself and doing things that you think are important, and your passions change over time. She's a great singer, great dancer, great actress. Great. She was in a couple movies, but sometimes you just change and you don't want to do that anymore. I get it.
Yeah, so I just thought the way that she approaches everything was very, it was a relief to read it. I mean, a lot of the times you hear about these celebrities that they feel like they can never retire or never be themselves, and she took the opposite approach. She was like, nope, now's my time. I'm going to go live in Switzerland with my husband, and if I don't want to answer your questions or, pose in front of a camera, I won't. But at the same time, she will when she wants to. So, her iconic wig and her red lipstick and all of that, and, just her singing, her voice and all that stuff, she does still display that when she wants to. Like, in the profile, it even says how the day before she was acting more like who she is, who she wants to be, and then the next day, she got dressed up for the camera. So it's all about, retirement should be about doing what you want to do. Like, you worked so hard, and she said that her life was, she had a very difficult life. She had an abusive husband. She was always in the spotlight. It certainly wasn't easy for her, despite the fame. So that was refreshing. And then the other story that I wrote was more along the lines of saving for retirement and how to make the most of your 401k so that you can retire comfortably. Maybe you won't retire like Tina Turner, unlike Zurich, but you can still do something that you want to do in retirement, and in order to do that, you need to save for it properly. So that was my second piece.
Awesome. Well, I love how you break it down, and so passionate about coffee and also savings. Alessandra Melito, always a pleasure chatting with you. Enjoy the weekend, get some rest, because next week we start helping people try to save and plan for their financial futures again. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye. Welcome back, and now we're going to turn things over. I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but we're going to turn things over to our friends on Capitol Hill, the Legal Eagles, David Levine, Kevin Walsh, both principals with the Groom Law Group. Gentlemen, how are you?
We are great. Jeff, thanks for having us. Congress is back.
Woohoo!
So it's like Backstreet Boys. Congress is back, all right. So we're here to talk.
Oh, all right. So Kevin, what's top of mind? I know we chatted earlier in the week about the Secure Act, Kevin. Had you on the network, but what do you guys think in terms of Congress? What are they up to? What are those cats up to?
So I think you can phrase it up as Congress is back in action, but it's not in action, it's inaction. They're not acting. So the idea was this past week, the appropriations committees were supposed to hold some markups to be in position to pass a labor spending bill by the end of the month. Those talks broke down. At this point, it looks like they'll do a continuing resolution to keep the Labor Department open. But with a CR, it becomes increasingly unlikely that they would attach something like the Secure Act. That being said, when talks resume, there's still some hope that the full year bill would include Secure. So that's kind of the Congress update. The other update is as bad a week as it's been in terms of congressional relations. It's been a worse week for the SEC.
Yeah.
And the SEC, as you recall, and we've talked about it a bunch of times, they released a package of rules designed to raise the standards for retail customers who receive recommendations or investment advice. And this past week, they were sued twice over regulation best interest. And essentially a handful of states and then XY Planning Network have both filed complaints asking federal courts in New York to strike down regulation best interest. So in the middle of the week, we thought, we're going to have two cases we have to watch. The latest update is that the two cases have been consolidated. So in terms of monitoring them, it's going to be pretty easy because they're both in the same docket. But what's going on now is we have a complaint where the states have alleged that, and the financial planners have alleged that the SEC failed to comply with kind of legal requirements by not imposing a higher standard on brokers. And now we're waiting for the SEC to respond. David, do you have any additional thoughts on it?
Actually, I think you hit it really well, Kevin. I think the key takeaway for now is this may feel like a bit of deja vu, because it's kind of like the flip of the fiduciary rule. Everybody files in Texas before. Now we've moved to New York. Will these cases survive? We will have to see. We recognize that regulation best interest, everybody's starting to focus on implementation for June of 2020. I think our next question is, let's see what happens before then. For now, keep watching. If you're a service provider, though, it's about continuing to watch what you do on that and say, okay, what's next for us? If you're a plan sponsor or other person in a similar role, one big question is, what does it mean? I think you're just going to have to keep asking questions. And if you start getting new paper, start saying, what does this mean to me? In our industry right now, we have seen a lot of folks on the sponsor side getting materials that are sent to them that say, I am a fiduciary, I act in your best interest, or I act with this type of standard. If you're a plan sponsor, this is your chance to say, well, what does that mean? And really drill down, because you've got to balance the ERISA, the Reg BI, you've still got people who are registered investment advisors, you've got state standards for annuities. As a fiduciary, if you're running your own plan, understand what terms and what standards apply, because fiduciary does not always mean fiduciary, but that's okay. You just need to sort through and know, what am I doing here? That's my thought.
And then I know you just took the plan sponsor side, but if you're a service provider, we share some of your pain, we share some of your sympathy. We know the efforts you went through to comply with the Department of Labor's fiduciary rule. We know you're making efforts now to comply with Reg BI. This litigation that seems to pop up every time there's a standard of care rule has meant that a lot of service providers have invested a lot of resources in developing compliance, only to find out that the thing they were developing the tools for have been eliminated. At this point, and this early in the litigation, we can't predict an outcome. So the best we can say is kind of keep chugging along, getting ready for Reg BI, and we'll keep you informed if things change.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thanks for the update. Obviously, it almost feels like Groundhog Day again. But I guess that's the way things work on the Hill, and that's the way these things work. They're not fast-moving vehicles. So thanks for giving us the update. And go ahead, David.
Thank you, Jeff. I was going to say, just remember, Phil will see his shadow every Groundhog Day. Just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Well, they heard it from David Levine. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Enjoy your weekend. David Levine, Kevin Walsh, take care. We'll talk to you all next week.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jeff.
guys.
Bye.
Well, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Weekly Pulse podcast. Special thanks to Mari Backman, personal finance reporter from The Motley Fool, for joining us. And special thanks to you for taking time out of your busy weekend to listen to all the latest news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, and more. You know, we really enjoy it, and we enjoy having you. So don't forget, stop back again next week right here on the Weekly Pulse.